Zoom is taking the car-sharing business model, similar to Zipcar, to cities in India. It's the first large-scale formal car-sharing network in India. It provides convenient vehicle access to millions more Indians, while at the same time taking vehicles off the road and resulting in fewer miles driven. It brings together the technological and operational best practices from car-sharing operators around the world, while also pioneering next practices. The majority of Indians cannot afford to own cars. And even for those that can, if you live in an Indian city, traffic and parking are absolutely nightmarish. And even if you could own a car, most people don't want to. However, there are a number of trips, a few times a month, for which a car is very useful. If you want to pick up visiting relatives from the airport, if you want to go to a hill station on the outskirts of town, if you want to go on a weekend excursion, a few times a month, people do have a real demand for vehicles. However, the current existing options in India are pretty limited. Car rental is very similar to how it was in the United States 10 years ago, where you pick up cars from a remote location like the airport for a rigid period of time, and they're only open during certain periods of time during the day. Chauffeur services, taxis are expensive, involve a lot of haggling, aren't private, and aren't necessarily reliable or safe. Now, India is really ripe for car sharing. Car sharing has been extremely successful in the past 20 years in Western Europe, in the past 10 years in North America. And in the last 5 years, it's emerged extremely successfully in developing countries such as China, Turkey, and Brazil. Most notably in China, Ehai, which was founded 4 years ago, has received $100 million in outside investment and is now in 25 Chinese cities. Now, India has an enormous market potential for car sharing, even though there's no car sharing operator currently in India. India has 42 metro areas with populations over 1 million, growing to 68 such cities by 2020. In contrast, Europe only has 35 cities with populations over 1 million. At the same time, the middle class is ballooning in India. Middle-class households are expected to increase from 22 million today to 91 million by 2030. There's also a cultural and economic change in India, which is beginning to increase the prevalence of self-drive over the more traditional Indian preference for chauffeur-driven cars. Self-drive is viewed as more independent, more cool, and more Western. Also, the rising wage for drivers, combined with the falling cost of Indian manufactured cars, means that the incremental cost that a driver adds as a percentage of a single trip is skyrocketing. This is really going to end the dominance of the chauffeur model in India. And in fact, self-drive is the fastest growing car rental segment in India. In addition, car ownership rates in India are quite low. Even in Indian cities, ownership is below 15%. This provides a huge opportunity for car sharing because it's much easier to change someone's driving habits if they don't actually already own a car. Finally, traffic and pollution in India has, and particularly certain cities, has reached such catastrophic levels that it's highly likely that many of these cities are going to implement restrictions on private vehicle ownership, such as taxes, quotas, or congestion charges that are being seen around the world in places such as London, Shanghai, and Beijing. Car sharing also benefits from an enormous first mover advantage. And as I said, Zoom will be the first car sharing organization in India. Evidence around the world shows that car sharing produces a natural monopoly in each city. In each market that Zipcar expanded to that already had an incumbent car sharing organization, Zipcar had to acquire that incumbent. There's only one exception in Philadelphia, where the local nonprofit, Philly Car Share, was put out of business. Now, this natural monopoly stems from enormous first mover advantages and barriers to entry that face any newcomer. There are switching costs for users. There's favorable media coverage for this new, convenient, inexpensive green service that's being offered. There's a limited quantity of the best parking spots at apartment complexes, at shopping districts, at universities, and things of that nature. Many of the best customers, which are institutional, such as city governments or corporations, can be locked in with long-term contracts. And finally, there are scale benefits for members. Here in Boston, I know that I can go anywhere in the city at any time and get pretty much any type of vehicle that I want. Any competitor to Zipcar in Boston would have to enter with a fleet of hundreds of vehicles to provide a similar level of convenience. Furthermore, no international car-sharing company is currently targeting India for expansion. Private car ownership has enormous fixed costs. You have to buy the car, you have to pay for parking, you have to pay for an insurance. The variable costs are quite low, fuel and wear and tear on your vehicle. Car sharing reverses this cost structure. The fixed costs are negligible, a small application fee and perhaps a small membership fee. The costs are almost entirely variable. If you drive half as much, you pay half as much. This incentivizes smarter driving. If you own a car, there's really no incentive for you not to drive 4 blocks to buy a quart of milk. But if you have to reserve a car and you have to pay for that trip, you're much less likely to do it. So by eliminating fixed costs, but significantly raising variable costs, car sharing allows dramatically more people to enjoy the benefits of car ownership. People down the income ladder who normally would never even dream of having access to a vehicle now have the freedom and benefits of it. However, it reduces the total number of miles driven. Research shows that for every car-sharing vehicle in North America or Western Europe, 14 to 15 vehicles were not purchased. And even for the miles that are driven, they're driven in a smarter way. Because you reserve the car ahead of time, car sharing is much more amenable to carpooling than traditional car ownership is. Additionally, car sharing allows an individual to take a small, compact, efficient vehicle or even a plug-in electric vehicle for around town driving, and only to get an SUV or a luxury vehicle for the very occasional trips that actually demand it. And one thing I want to comment on is that the social and environmental benefits of car sharing are even greater in the developing world than they are here in the United States. It is so much easier to deter somebody from buying a car in the first place because they have an attractive alternative than it is to persuade somebody to give up a car that they already own.